Hey friend, today I have UX writer Owen Williams with me, and we're going to do a video all about how designers and UX writers work together. Before we get into it, Owen, maybe you can start by introducing yourself.
Yeah, I am a freelance UX writer and copywriter, a little bit of everything.
So we put out a question on Twitter asking what questions you have about UX writing, and we're going to address them now in this video. So the first question, which I think is a good question to kick this off, is from Chris, and he asks, what exactly is a UX writer?
I think there's like 1,200 interpretations of what it is, but usually it's writing the copy for an application or website that isn't the marketing. So it's like the words that you see when there's an error or during the onboarding. Or
when you're actually using the product.
Yeah, it's like if you would sign up for Facebook, we would look at the flow of you signing up. What words are in the boxes? What does it tell you to do next? What's on the button? Somebody asked what the difference is between a copywriter and a UX writer in your comments of your tweet. When you put a copywriter on a product instead of a UX writer, they do really fancy things like put "let's go" in a button or like oops, something went wrong. And I think the difference between a copywriter and a UX writer is that the copywriter is like trying to make it really friendly and fun, like marketing side. Like you talk to users very differently on a marketing website, and a UX writer tries to take it from that to something that's functional while still retaining some level of like personality in the product.
Got it. So we also had quite a few questions about where do you start when deciding on writing copy, and also where in the overall design and product process do you bring in a UX writer?
It's a really hard question because in an ideal world, you would start at the beginning before you've actually built any design. The UX writing thing reveals a lot about your design. I've worked with companies who have done it much later, and then after they've designed it, now they have to go and redesign it, because when I went through and write all the strings and all the things, we realized it was just really confusing, and there was nowhere to put stuff. Like we couldn't explain, like sometimes you need a piece of text that's like explaining what's going on, and they haven't factored that into their design. Or the next button is changing on every screen or like whatever, and it will save you a lot of time if you do it at the start. It's not the end of the world. It just means that it's going to take longer.
Yeah, I find it's always really helpful bringing the UX writer in at the very beginning, even like the very, very beginning when you're kicking off a project, because their contribution and their ideas are going to be so valuable in the process, especially when it comes to designing. Okay, the next question is from Antolio, who asks, what does your work process look like? Which tools do you use? And can you give me some good tips about UX writing? Any articles or books or resources?
I'll start from the bottom. The only book I know about, this is such a new field that like very few companies practice it. The best resource is a book called On Writing Well. It's actually from the 90s. It's amazing. They just teach you like all of the bad habits. Like they're just like, here's the things you shouldn't do ever. And that's a really good resource for that. Okay, so here's how I usually work with companies. I usually go in there, I try and like, at least if I'm working with them on site, I'll sit with them and like try and figure out what they actually want. A lot of the time, like a UX writing project will come to me and they say like, oh, well, we want UX writing, and what they mean is they just want some fancy copy for like their landing screen or whatever. But when that's
what they think they need.
Yeah, well, that's the thing. And oftentimes the scope gets bigger because I work with companies that say, oh, well, we want to fix our onboarding flow. I'm like, great. But at the end of the onboarding flow, they're going to end up somewhere. So we better fix that screen as well. It's a slippery slope.
Yeah.
Now, once we kind of are on the same page about it, I actually just kind of take stock of everything. So I have this like crazy spreadsheet thing that I have in Notion. I go through the product, take stock, and I tag everything. So I'm like, here's a header, here's description copy, here's a like button, action button.
Each bit of text is
and it's all in there. And so we have an old text column, and then we start the process of writing it. And what we'll do is then I'll go through and start writing strings that they can drop into the app and see if it feels right. And then we'll come back and we'll do a few feedback rounds and that kind of thing. For new projects, it's very different because you're involved in the process. And a lot of the time it's like, write some stuff to put in this box. And so there's nothing existing, and it's just basically the same. It's like, we need this and this and this for each thing. I have a spreadsheet. I know there's nothing better. It's just a spreadsheet.
So your tools are spreadsheets.
Yeah, spreadsheets. Everything's spreadsheets. The most important thing I push during this is just like actions and headers and all that kind of thing are very different things, because buttons can be the same and they should be the same. So it's like, if you have a button that says next, it shouldn't change. A lot of people are like, let's change a copy on every page. Let's go. Okay, onward. Like, all that stuff is cute and fun. The user's just looking for a next button.
All right, the next question is from Jay, who asks, how do you validate the copy and ensure that it's right for the end customer?
I think a lot of these kinds of projects, you can't really reasonably do that. Like, it's a nice idea to ask your users, but it's kind of often bundled in with validating the design, which is fine. You'll have these like design reviews, usually with like user testing things, and you go and ask people how they're using it. And it usually involves actually asking more questions about it. So like, did you understand what was going on based on what it says? Like, what do you think is going to happen on this button? Or that, you're asking more conceptual stuff. I think in user testing with designers, often you're trying to look to see, does the user get befuddled by like the flow? Are they getting stuck somewhere? Now you want to be asking is like, do you know what's going to happen after this? Or
when you tap this button.
What does this error mean? Like, I think you start asking that kind of thing. Now, the other thing you can do is, my recommendation is actually, if it's an existing product, just start testing it in the product in line with the other copy still in it. So like A/B tested, because you'll be able to tell pretty easily if it's going really badly. It's important to like test it in situ. Maybe it was confusing before, but people got past it because of that. Or maybe there was a problem because of something else that you need to now solve. And so it's quite useful to like have it there alongside the existing one and see how it performs. Are people getting stuck more often? Are they spending more time on the screen? That kind of thing. You can automate it. There's some websites like usertesting.com. You can like put it in the product and have people record themselves and click through. I've used that before. It's actually pretty good.
All right, the next question is from Kevin, who asks, what sort of research do you do to understand the terminology or slang of a product and its audience?
Okay, yeah, so it depends a lot on like the space that they're in. The biggest issues are slang and like terminology and that kind of thing, especially because like different audiences are exposed to different words. And so I was involved in a project with a like telecommunications company, and my goodness, there's just slang everywhere there. So for example, you might have like a slang phrase, programmatic voice. What does that mean? But those users know actually, because they're using this product, or that was the theory. And so understanding when you're using jargon and when you're not is really important. Like I push back on it a lot, and I was saying like, look, I don't know what programmatic voice is. I can assume it's an API for voice calls. I assume, but your users probably have no idea what voice is. Like, they can kind of get it, but they don't know. My preference is always to remove any jargon. Like, if you can avoid industry jargon, your product's going to be better. If there's a reason to use it and it's a widely accepted jargon, you should use it. And that's the hard line to walk, is like, don't use stuff that you know, but only use stuff that everybody knows.
We forget also about like new users and people experiencing your product for the first time. You want to think about that experience too. And if they come across a new term that they're not familiar with, then that could hinder.
So there's one thing that you can do here that helps is if you are going to use jargon, and if you insist on it, explain it over and over and over, or have a way that like the user can find out what that means really easily. You need to explain it to them the first time they ever see it, or you're screwed.
All right, a great question from Alexa, who asks, how can we as UX designers make your job and process easier? I
think the biggest thing is involve me earlier. Like, a lot of the time, involve me as early as you can, but also on an ongoing basis. Copy actually shouldn't be the same forever. The copy that's there today is not going to work forever. So that helps a lot. And the big thing for me is use modern tools. Like, it sucks being on a project where I have to email you feedback or like work on it that way. I prefer to, like, if you just have Figma, I can send it in there. I'd like to work towards a world where I can just edit it in some backend and see it, but we're not there yet. But however, I think like being able to go in there and use the thing and see it. I've been involved in projects that have 100 screens in them, and so doing that feedback in a spreadsheet is the worst. So like in Figma, you can comment directly where the copy should go. The designer knows what to do. Like, it's very clear how we're moving forward. I can test it in there if you're crazy enough to let me. It's a much better flow, but just being involved helps a lot.
Okay, and another question from Fran, who asks, how do you define a global content strategy that can be implemented in many markets, including different languages? That is really hard.
It's impossible.
Because you're doing everything in English, I assume.
I currently do, but I've worked on international projects, and I think there's a couple of things you can do to make it easier.
Okay.
first of all, design with other languages in mind at the beginning.
And that can help avoid, someone else had a question about widows and orphans.
Oh, yeah.
So I always try to test with German as well, because it's like the longest language in terms of how long the words are.
But also, how does your design work with a right to left language? How does it work with other languages that are top down? And then the biggest thing I would say you should have is just the guidelines. I can't write Japanese, but if you write a document that explains the decisions you made and how you got there, then the people who will write it can transcreate it into Japanese.
Yeah.
And then they should explain it back to you in the context. And they should be able to push back against that too. Some languages it won't work, like to have no full stops or whatever. But I think it's just about being involved with them. Like, you can't just send it to a translator and say, like, put this in Japanese. It doesn't work. It's going to be terrible. UX writing is beyond just like the actual writing, but it's actually about like, how will people understand this in the context of their language as well? Like, am I going to be looking there? It's really hard. You can't, like, you need to have that empathy. Like, I don't know Japanese. I'm never, like, I don't know it. Like, and I have to lean on other people. But if you have that common framework for how you work, at least they can kind of be on the same page immediately. Designers should work closely with the writer and the translation team to make sure it works.
Ideally. What are some quick wins you can do to improve the product copy?
Oh yeah, that's really quite easy actually. Just scope it really specifically. Often onboarding is a good place to start, but you can also just scope it as small as like, we want to review all the error states. I'm working on a project like this right now where they're like, look, we can't afford to, the product is huge, let's just do the error states. People keep falling off and they don't know what to do. We get a lot of support tickets about error states. So let's go through and find all of them and we'll do that. If it goes well, we'll do the rest. A UX writing project doesn't need to be enormous. I actually think it's worse. You're better off just like picking a piece, having that win and iterating. Like, it shouldn't be this whole huge enormous thing.
Yeah, I think there's two things you can do. One is look out for any existing inconsistencies. So for example, like, evaluate all of your buttons. Are they consistent? And another thing you could do is maybe just do a quick user test with someone. Put it in front of them, see what they think, how they're interpreting and understanding the language that you're using, and get that kind of quick feedback there to see what you can improve upon.
Yeah.
Okay, and last question comes from me. And my question to you is, what is your involvement in terms of validation during the development process? Are you sitting with engineers and making sure that they are entering the correct copy, checking how the copy looks like in the final product? What's your involvement there?
So again, it depends on the type of project that we're doing. If this is like a retrospectively done UX writing project, which is a lot of them that I do, I come in usually as a contractor, so I'm coming in external. I don't work on site most of the time, but what I do is set up, you know, check-ins where I go into the office once a month, once a week, whatever it might be, and we sit down and we go through the screens based on what we've done together. I want to be involved until the moment it's finished. Like, I want to be there until it's implemented. The other thing you can do is just like have check-ins. I comment directly on things. I ask them to send me like iterations as they're working. It can feel like it's too much maybe, but it's not. Like, as much information as I can get. But also just like, I encourage them to do the same for my work. Come on into the spreadsheet, make notes, tell me when it's like, you're like, I want to use this slang. It's just how it is. Fine, but like we need to have that debate,
have a conversation about it
rather than hide it, because if you would do it later, it will be worse. Yeah.
Okay, that's all the time we have today for those questions. Owen, thank you so much for coming on and being involved. Where can people go to find out more about you or maybe work with you?
At OW on Twitter, yes, short username, I'll tell you later. Awesome. Otherwise, just Google Owen Williams freelancer and you'll find it.
Cool. Awesome. Well, thank you. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye.
Bye.